Sometimes I think every new day provides me with the opportunity to do something I will later regret. Is that true of everyone? Does everyone feel the cringe that wells up over the mind when your thoughts lead you willy-nilly to a memory of yourself as a cold, cowardly, inconsiderate scoundrel, a two-faced weakling, an arrogant jerk? Now that I'm nearing 80 years old, I've had time to grow a long list. But in the beginning, to reach the back door of the house where I grew up, you had to go through the laundry room. It was a long room filled with big white cubes, bunkers of purity. Not to mention the roller which ironed the sheets and guaranteed us smooth and innocent dreams. Those machines worked all the time. The four kids were constantly getting dirty. My father worked with his hands, and my mother would push the buttons as soon as the perfume of laundry soap faded from 2 pairs of underwear and a sock. I've often wondered, the expression, cleanliness is next to godliness? Does that mean that it's as important to be clean as to be pious? Or almost as important? Leaving the long room, you had a choice. If you turned right, you went outside through the back door. And if you turned left, you went downstairs to the basement, where the children had their toys and my father had his workbench. On that day, I was planning to go outside. I was 15 at the time, and during my adolescence, even before my adolescence, as a matter of fact, I've always had a hard time staying in one place. So I reached the back door and am about to open it when I see my brother coming upstairs from the basement. My brother's 3 years younger than I am. His sweetness, his kindness, maybe his softness can be seen in the gentle nodding of his head. He's had a nice time down in the basement. He's feeling safe, happy to be alive. At that instant, something grabbed my mind. It exploded in my chest as if in a cauldron. It lifted me like a doll. It thrust me forward. I didn't have time to put my hands on the doorknob when they were flung at his throat, and I squeezed. My brother screamed. My father came running. My hands let go of their hold. My father came at me. He pushed me. He said, "You want to fight?" Said my father. "Oh, come on, I'll fight you. Fight me." I stepped back. And for the first time in my life, I felt in the thrust of my father's arms that someday, in the not too far off future, I would be as strong, if not stronger than him. And it was my turn to be terrified. Go figure. Who's to blame? You might think I'm trying to shirk my responsibility, but I swear to you that something other than me had guided, not to say dictated, my act. Something that dated back to the time when our different traits were being baked into our nature. Because I'm surely not the first human being to be swept up by an impulse to murder. I'm not the first human being to be swept up by an impulse to murder. Surely not. Consider Cain and Abel. Was it their parents, Adam and Eve, the first couple's fault that the doors were open to our violent tendencies that we've inherited all the way up or down to us today? What exactly was their sin? Maybe they just wanted to understand their existence. And it was no accident that they were influenced by a slithery sex symbol, a muscular creature built for penetrating any and all holes. And can we blame Eve for giving in to its seductive pitch? Let's imagine her on that fateful day. She's outside, gazing over her property, savoring the fresh air, delighting in the color scheme, when she hears, "Hello, cutie." "Oh, hello. What are you doing?" Nothing. I was just daydreaming." "Oh, that's a lovely way to spend the day. But wouldn't you like a little nosh?" No, yes, maybe. Why?" "Taste this." "It's the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We're not supposed to eat it." "Who told you you weren't supposed to eat it?" The Creator." "Oh, you must have misunderstood. He surely told you that you must absolutely eat of this fruit. It's the tastiest, the most delicious, the most succulent." Can we blame Eve for giving in to that seductive pitch? Her man was sleeping in the shade after accomplishing an exhausting feat, giving names to all the animals in the world's over 7,000 languages. We don't know how long he had been dead to the world before Eve gave in to temptation, but we do know that had she not let her curiosity overcome her resistance, we would still be vegetating on that immaculate lawn, stupefied by our ignorance, until finally dropping dead before knowing what hit us. When you think about it, did Adam and Eve even know they were in paradise? If you don't know you're happy, are you happy? And here's something else. The snake and Eve are often accused of being solely responsible or chiefly responsible for humanity's eviction from paradise. But when Eve proposed the fruit to Adam, did he say, "Oh no, absolutely not, I won't even touch it, it's forbidden"? Did he even say, "Well, if it were baked into a pie with a scoop of ice cream, I might give it a try"? No. Takes the fruit. He devours it, and he loved it. They ate the fruit. Their eyes were open, and each one saw how sexy the other one was, and they knew each other. They knew each other. But does that mean that they hadn't made love before when they were in paradise? Or if they had made love, did they know what they were doing? Did they have any pleasure? If you don't know you're happy, are you happy? Anyways, they ate the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. But what side does sex fall on? The evil side or the good side? It's an important question because the answer has consequences for us today. In other words, they ate the fruit and swallowed the seed. What was the nature of that seed? Our nature. Their two sons, Cain and Abel, grew into strapping young men, each of whom chose an activity that complemented the others. A balanced meal is a combination of protein, carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals. A meat patty in a bun with a slice of tomato and a lettuce leaf. Cain had his fields, Abel had his flocks, and they got along fine. Until the day the Creator leaned down through the clouds and said, "Show me what you can do." So, Cain dragged out a huge basket that he filled with stalks of corn, sunflower, wheat, barley, luscious vegetables, perfectly ripe fruit, all of it placed on a bed of gorgeous, sweet-smelling flowers. It was a monument to the splendid fecundity of the earth. At the same time, Abel slaughtered a camel, an ox, and a sheep, started a fire, and made a barbecue. And the Creator said, "That smells good, that meat." And after the Creator had satisfied himself with the savory smoke, he noticed that, "Cain, are you sulking?" "No, I'm not sulking." "Yes, you are, Cain. Stop that right now. Continue working, and I will praise you too." A little while later, the two brothers are alone in a far-off field. Cain says to Abel, "Hey, Abel, look, there's something shiny down there." And Abel's still looking for the shiny thing his brother told him about. He's breathing calmly, free of dread, innocent, in perfect harmony with the meaning of his name, because Abel means breath or vapor. Cain picks up a huge rock, sneaks around his brother, lifts it high over his head, and brings it down hard on the defenseless neck. It was a beautiful day. I was about 7 or 8. My brother was 5 or 6. And I told him to stand with his back to the wall. The wall was made of wood. I was holding 3 or 4 darts, and my idea was to imitate the knife thrower we had seen recently in a circus. The first 2 darts landed not too far from his head. Sure of myself now, I threw the 3rd dart. It stuck in his lower lip, where, still obeying his older brother's order not to move, he let it dangle. I ran to remove it before one of our parents discovered our game. It could have been his eye.
Cain, where is your brother?
My brother. I don't know, I haven't seen him lately.
Cain, you have killed your brother. You are condemned to wander the earth until the end of your life.
Cain is kicked out. And he does wander the earth, with the mark that the Creator has left on his forehead to warn anyone who would be tempted to do him harm, not to touch him. According to some stories, Cain was the founder of the first city, the place of high energy, sophistication, creativity, and crime. Centuries witnessed the passing of a long series of generations. So-and-so engendered so-and-so. A father engendered a son who carried the name. He who carried the name engendered another name bearer, all the way down to Terah, who engendered Abram. Abram was born in Ur, a city not far from Babylon, in what is today Iraq. Some translators speak about Ur of the Chaldeans. Many years ago, during a visit to Detroit, my hometown, I was sitting by the swimming pool in a little gym where my father used to work out. He and I were sitting side by side. 3 young men were jumping into the pool. Given their size and well-nourished bodies, their play was making the water overflow the edge of the pool. Not understanding what they were saying to each other, I asked my father if he knew where they were from. "They're Chaldeans," he said. "Oh, Chaldeans, so they must be from Iraq." He said, "I have no idea," meaning who cares. Today I wonder how my father could be so sure that the 3 young men were Chaldeans. My father spoke only one language, English, with a smattering of Yiddish left over from the days when he shared his bedroom as a boy with his grandmother. Detroit is the seat of one of the biggest Middle Eastern communities in the United States. In Detroit you can find Jordanians, Syrians, Lebanese, Egyptians, Moroccans, Algerians. How could my father be so sure that the 3 young men were Chaldeans? Because in Detroit, you don't doubt your own identity as long as you can identify the others. It's a question of survival. So, I said to him, "You know who else was from that same region? Abraham. Father Abraham, the first patriarch of the Jews. He was from Ur, in the land of Chaldeans." That bit of information offered up in the swimming pool in the middle of the industrial powerhouse that was just beginning to show signs of decline impressed my father about as much as, let's say, the results of a girls' junior league soccer match in an African country he'd never heard of. For my father, those 3 young men could have no connection, be it historic, with Father Abraham, on Woodward Avenue that runs south to north in a straight line, 3 lanes going each way. A car full of young Jews pulls up at a red light next to a car full of young Chaldeans. They exchange menacing looks. Then the light turns green. The cars shoot off. They're neck and neck until one of them pulls ahead of the other just enough to force it off the road into a roll and crash into the walls of a fast food restaurant. Oh. Oh. What has this got to do with the story of Abraham? In the beginning of the 20th century, my grandfather, Ben Lefkowitz, at the age of 14, left his little village near Minsk and alone crossed half of Europe, the Atlantic Ocean, half of the United States, and settled in Detroit, where he began making a living selling candy to workers in the automobile factories. Ford, General Motors, Dodge, proposing a mouthful of sweetness to people who worked 8, 9, 10 bitter hours on the assembly line. It was a shrewd and lucrative idea. He soon made enough money to send boat tickets to his sisters, brothers, and mother, but not to his stepfather. But more important to me than his success in business was the fact that he left home so early. That was my motto. Yeah. Get up and go. Steh auf und geh. Ande. Yetri gänge. Avante. Lech lecha. Departure leads to freedom. Separation can be a source of clarity. Clear divisions and categories. Up, down, light, darkness, scales, feathers, liquid, solid, male, female, clean, dirty. And speaking of cuts, Abram becomes Abraham when he accepts the inscription of the alliance with the Creator on his body. When the bit of flesh is removed, the Creator adds a letter in the middle of his name, making of Abram, Abraham. The letter sounds like a breath, hey, and has the shape of a door. You move through here towards something else. The same letter was added to his wife's name, making of Sarai, Sarah. She's very beautiful. But regarding this couple, a fundamental dimension, the engendering process, is stuck. It's a little complicated, as is often the case with couples. At the age of 16, my grandmother, Sophie Levy, set up a candy stand in front of the main gate of the Ford factory. Actually, it was just a table that she would chain to a lamppost overnight. She was pretty, high-spirited, witty, and graceful. She met my grandfather on the day when he stopped his horse and cart in front of her stand and offered her his services as a wholesale supplier. While he was describing his product line, he got a chance to take a close look at his potential customer, and he saw what he was looking for. Before he even reached the end of the list of products and prices, he asked for her hand in marriage. No doubt the exchange between the pretty adolescent and the stocky 26-year-old took place in Yiddish. There were 10 years age difference. But she She agreed to buy his products, even though she said to herself that she thought he was a little crazy. Every week he returned to deliver her order and to repeat his marriage proposal. After a few months, she said to herself, "He isn't very handsome, but he is a good man. I see that he is a good man. Maybe he can help my family." It's true, he wasn't very good looking. It's as if the spirit that modeled him couldn't find the smaller, finer tools when it came to putting the finishing touches on his face. But his eyes brimmed over with determination and focus and sensitivity to others. She told him that he would have to wait until she graduated high school. It was in 1916. My father was born in 1919. My father, Julian Lefkowitz. For Abraham and Sarah, things were a little more complicated. One night, Sarah wakes up Abraham. "What's the matter? Are we being attacked?" "No, I have to tell you something. It's really important." Can't it wait until tomorrow?" "No, I have to tell you now when I have the courage." "Okay, I'm listening." "I'm old." "Ah, that's true. Well, so are you. You're older than me, but you're a man. You have all the time in the world. For me, it's too late. You have to have an heir. I can't give you one. It's not working. I don't have any pleasure anymore. So you have to have a son. We have to face up to reality. Take my Egyptian slave, Agar." "What do you mean, take her?" "Oh, do I have to draw you a picture? Stop playing the fool." The next morning, Sarah takes Abraham to where Agar is milking the goats. Her skirt is hiked up high on her thighs, revealing her smooth, copper-colored skin. "Go with him," Sarah says to Agar. She stands up and starts walking behind Abraham, who's carrying a blanket. They walk beyond the sounds of the camp, the goats, and the people. Abraham spreads out the blanket, and a few months later, Agar is parading her stomach in front of Sarah, showing it off like it was some kind of a sports trophy. Sarah says to Abraham, "I can't stand the sight of him." "Who are you talking about?" "Of her. You know who I'm talking about." "Who are you talking about?" "That bitch. I want to get rid of her." "Do what you want. She belongs to you." Apparently, domestic tranquility was more important to Abraham than the heir who was growing towards birth in Agar's womb. There's a saying somewhere in the Talmud which says, God has the first word, man has the second word, and it's the woman who has the last word. Agar finds herself alone, weeping next to a water source. A divine presence, an angel, appears to her and says, "What are you doing here?" "My mistress kicked me out." Return to her, ask her for forgiveness. She'll take you back in. And she does. A few months later, she gives birth to a son, a man-child, who will run as fast as a gazelle. His name, Ismail. Some years later, Sarah, too, at the age of 90, gives Abraham a son. Abraham was 10 years older than Sarah. A creator is capable of anything and everything. his name Isaac, which means laughter. And that's what Sarah did when Isaac was born. She laughed. But shortly after, she says to Abraham, I can't stand the sight of them. Who are you talking about? That bitch and her brat of a son. You know very well who I'm talking about. Wait a minute, Sarah. Calm down. Ishmael is also my son. And it was your idea to... She started mocking me long before Isaac was born. Why do you have to keep her now that I've given you a son? Sarah... do you think it was easy to give birth at my age? I did it for you. Huh? I'd like a little justice, a little recognition. And here's another thing that you probably haven't thought of. He, the other one, and his mother, they're going to ask for half of Isaac's inheritance. And you, my good fellow, don't have enough for two. So, think it over, huh? You who are supposed to be so wise and intelligent. Think it over. Abraham gives in, and they send Agar and Ishmael away. The Creator tries to reassure him, saying, don't worry, Ishmael will have a destiny. He will give birth to 12 princes and be the ancestor of a great and formidable nation. And anyways, you know what the Talmud says. God has the first word, man has the second word. Do what she says. Agar finds herself alone in the bush with her son. An angel appears to her and leads her and her son to a water source. They survive. And as promised, Ishmael will have a great destiny. For Muslims, it was Ishmael whose throat was almost cut by Abraham in the famous test of faith. For the Jews, it was Isaac. But according to both the traditions, Abraham cut into the bodies of both his sons, the sign of the alliance with the Creator. Ishmael when he was 13, Isaac when he was 8 days old. Both sons carry the cut made by the same hand. Since then, of course, their descendants, the Jews and the Muslims, have often shown hostility towards each other. That's the least we can say. But here's something important to point out, at least in my opinion. When Abraham died at the age of 175, the two sons met to dig the grave together where they buried their father in their common grief. My mother used to misplace her glasses often. And without making too much of an effort to find them, she would call my father, "Julian, my glasses!" He would stop whatever he was doing and go off in search of his wife's specs. She would leave them in the strangest places, behind a pot of yogurt in the refrigerator, between the pages of a book, on the lid of the garbage can in the garage in the restaurant where they ate the night before. No matter how long it took, he wouldn't stop looking until he finally hunted them down. It was a kind of ritual between them that symbolized and put into action a central dimension in their relationship. Later, when my father got old, he suffered from arthrosis, pretty acute. Just to stand up, he had to overcome pain in his legs and his back. But he continued answering, "I'm coming," whenever she called, "Julian, my glasses." By spoiling her, he maintained his image of a man, a real man, someone capable of taking care and serving his beloved. Shortly before he died, he said to my sister, "I never said no to her. I'm not going to start now." Abraham finds a wife for Isaac next to a well. It's a biblical tradition to find a wife next to a well. You arrive after a long trek, you're thirsty, your camel is thirsty. A woman gives you drink. Then she takes you home. You expose to her father your lineage. The important thing is not to mix with the pagans. Abraham's servant finds Rebekah, a young woman, next to a well. Her father's name is Bethuel. Bethuel's father was Nahor. Nahor was Abraham's brother. So, Isaac and Rebekah are cousins. No mixing with the pagans. Everything's cool. They get on their camels and ride back to Canaan. As they approach Abraham's camp, Rebekah sees a young man walking away from the tents, and she asks Abraham's servant, "Who's that?" And Abraham's servant says, "That's him, mademoiselle." Without showing it too much, she's very pleased. And Isaac, when he sees her, finds her to his liking. They know each other. Rebekah gets pregnant. Very pregnant. Enormously pregnant. Incredibly pregnant. She gets so pregnant that she demands an explanation from the Creator. I'm stretched, torn, twisted. I'm the house of a monumental battle. What's going on? The Creator says, "Yeah, they're twins. You're expecting twins. And if I were you, I wouldn't leave anything fragile lying around." The first one out is covered with red hair, like fur. His name will be Esau. He's tough. He doesn't cry as he exits the womb, but he feels something dragging on his foot. It's his brother Jacob's fingers. Esau will get Jacob to do and see things that he would have never have done or seen had he been an only child. That's the thing about these stories. The important thing is to move history forward, in spite of or thanks to the character's character. Remember, thanks to Eve, we escaped a death-like stupor. And Esau's role will turn out to be greater and more complex than that of a simple-minded brute. In 1970, my brother married a woman from the same social milieu, maybe even the same neighborhood. To my surprise, he asked me to be his best man. The night before the wedding, we were all gathered in my parents' home in their kitchen, my brother, my parents, and I. And we were surrounded by piles of unwrapped gifts and rented tuxedos, rented dishes and glasses. And the phone kept ringing, people from out of town saying that they had arrived, and the caterer calling for last-minute details like, which mustard do you eat with gefilte fish? Wait a minute, do you eat mustard with gefilte? No, horseradish. Right, horseradish. It should have been a pleasant, even exciting moment. But rather than laughing at my father's stories about his wedding, For example, no one remembered to pick up my mother to drive her to the synagogue. I launched into a violent attack on the war in Vietnam. My brother was in the Navy. I don't remember what kind of ship he was on. I was demonstrating against the war. I had even spent a couple nights in jail after one demonstration in Washington. My brother justified his involvement by saying that if he had a son, he wanted to be able to tell his son that he did his part during the war. I said to that, that's exactly why I'm refusing to participate, in case I have a child later who asks me what I did. And so with thrust and parry, I laid out arguments, statistics, quotes. My father, in an effort to patch up the atmosphere, said, "My country, right or wrong." No doubt my father was trying to defend his second son on the eve of his wedding, but I think there was another hidden reason behind his declaration of mindless patriotism. Because of his poor eyesight, my father was practically blind without his glasses. He was exempted from serving in the Second World War. For a Jew faced with the Nazis, being exempted was a source of shame. My brother used the words that my father would have liked to use, speaking to his sons, to us. I did my part. But my father was left with his regret, embarrassment, and shame because he could not say those words. I did my part. Maybe they thought that my brother's uniform redeemed my father's honor. I don't know. I do know that they were very close at that moment, that they were living the same historical period, that they spoke with a single voice. Very quickly, Esau proves himself to be endowed with exceptional strength, courage, endurance. He spent days running through the bush, climbing trees, hunting animals. And his father, Isaac, is proud of that son. He's a real man, that one is. Whereas Jacob prefers to stay home. He helps his mother with the chores, the courtyard, the bread, the laundry, the cotton. And he spends hours daydreaming in front of the horizon. And his mother, Rebecca, loves that child. Come talk to your mommy, my little treasure. Come tell your mommy some stories. I love it when you tell me stories. My mother wasn't like that. She never overflowed with emotion. My mother learned to express emotion through books. How-to books, how to have a nice garden, how to talk about a painting, how to have a successful marriage, how to raise happy children. I love you. She tried. She was awkward and laughable. But she did try. I have to say that. Esau is dominated by his impulses, his sensations. That's the kind of person he is. For example, one day he comes home from hunting, and he's really hungry. He sees his brother Jacob eating a plate of lentils. Oh, Esau says, "Give me something to eat." Jacob says, I'll give you the whole dish if you give me half of your inheritance. Esau's hungry. He can't think about anything else. And so he says, yeah, I'll give you whatever you want. Just give me that plate of lentils. Okay, it's a promise? Yeah. Bon appetit. Gives up half of his inheritance just for a plate of lentils. Another time, but this isn't a question of sensations, he was tricked out of the other half of his inheritance by his mother and Jacob. And in the end, he was left with nothing. And when he discovers what's happened, he swears vengeance. Anyways, the old man isn't long for this earth, and as soon as he dies, I'll get back at that two-faced rat. All his intelligence can't defend him against my hands once they grab his neck. Yeah. Rebecca knows her oldest son. And she says to her second son, Jacob, you have to flee. You can't stay here. If you do, your brother will kill you. Go north to my father's country. Don't stay. Go right now. Flee. The path to freedom moves through departure. Clarity comes to us as a result of separation. But all paths are marked by pitfalls. Separation gives rise to difference. Difference evolves into identity. Identity grows into certitude. Certitude hardens into smugness. And smugness results in Gewalt. Like his father before him, Jacob found a wife next to a well. But he will never see his mother again. And 20 years will go by before he finds himself once more face to face with his brother, Esau. 20 years. Lots of things can happen in 20 years. The mind can submit to different influences, take different directions. Or, and this is probably equally if not more common, the mind can settle into set patterns, stagnate in a routine. But whatever the case, in the end, you look back and say, what? It's already been 20 years? How is it that a mind which has become closed will suddenly open up to others and to the world? Is the crack in the shell the result of chance or of will, of circumstances or of decisions? Can you deliberately decide to open up? How is it that on one day you're overwhelmed by a tiny little thing, and the next day you don't notice a miracle? I can't explain why at the age of 20, I saw a quality in my brother that, for a time at any rate, washed away the bile in which my image of him had steeped. It took place 6 years after the day I tried to strangle him at the top of the stairs, and 6 years before his wedding. Our father had taken us on a camping trip to the northern part of the lower peninsula of Michigan. The part of the region that glaciers had flattened and then melted into thousands of little lakes of different sizes, little and big lakes. The lake where we pitched our tent was so small I wondered today if it had a name. It was set in the middle of a birch forest, white bark, dark water. The water was so dark it was almost black, and the sun rays splintered into golden rays that vanished near the surface. It was really quite beautiful. After a lunch of peanut butter and jam sandwiches, I sat down on a stump with a book, while my brother got in the little boat and rowed to the middle of the lake, where he dropped in a fishing line. Very quickly, he caught a bluegill, a pretty little fish that's good to eat. But rather than dropping the fish into the bucket, he delicately removed the hook from the fish's mouth and then threw the fish into the water, and then leaned over the side of the boat to make sure the fish had survived its ordeal. My father had watched the whole thing, and he called out to my brother, "Hey, son, what are you doing? That would have changed us from our diet of peanut butter and jam." My brother didn't say anything. I didn't say anything either. I could have mocked him today. I'm surprised I didn't. He turned his back and continued doing the same thing all afternoon. He repeated the same process, like some apprentice surgeon who has to practice on real flesh while striving not to do harm. Back to Jacob. 20 years after his hurried departure, Jacob is on his way back to Canaan. He's returning home as a successful man. He's taken 2 wives, 2 sisters, Leah and Rachel, and 2 concubines. His wives and concubines have given him 12 sons. His favorite wife, Rachel, has given him his favorite son, Joseph, and the last, Benjamin. Jacob also has a daughter, Dinah, who's going to live a terrible story involving 2 of her brothers, the same mother. Jacob has lots of servants and lots of cattle, sheep, goats, camels, oxen, all of them with spotted hides. It's really a spectacular procession. During the several weeks that the trek lasted, caring for the animals and the children, defending against predators, fighting the heavy winds, looking for food and water, one thought, one dread, one image dominated Jacob's mind: his imminent meeting with his brother, Esau. Oh, Jacob had changed since the days when he was loafing in the shade of his mother's apron. He had developed his strength, his courage, his ruse. He was afraid of meeting his brother, but he wasn't afraid of other forces. For example, on the evening before his arrival, Jacob stayed alone on the banks of the river Jabbok, which is now in Jordan. And it's funny, that name. You could almost confuse it for Jacob, Jabbok. It's as if Jacob, in crossing over the Jabbok, was crossing over himself. before he could enter a new stage of his life. He stayed alone there, maybe to meditate and ready himself for his meeting, his confrontation with his brother. And it was there that he was challenged to a fight by a strange man. It wasn't to be a fight to the finish. We're not in gladiator country. Just maybe a question of measuring themselves. And as I said, Jacob had, put on muscle during the 20 years, filled out his clothes, so he felt perfectly capable of handling this strange man. All night they wrestled. Jacob's legs, his limbs are stretched to the limit. And then, just before dawn, the strange man tried to get away, but Jacob held him back and demanded his blessing. Because Jacob had sensed that, in fact, the strange man was a divine presence, and he figured that his blessing might come in handy when he had to confront his brother. It might give him an edge against his brother. So he says, "Bless me." But what does the strange man do? Realizing that he couldn't get the better of Jacob, he tore a muscle in his leg, which is why kosher butchers remove the sciatic nerve from the meat. And then he asked Jacob his name. Strange, no? He didn't say, "Your sons will have sons, you will acquire great riches, your enemies will be conquered," whatever you might expect from a blessing. No, he just says, "What's your name?" "Jacob. From now on, your name will be Israel, he who struggled with the divine." From then on, Jacob will be condemned to worry, to think before acting, to assume responsibility for his acts, to ask questions. And speaking of questions, I have one for you. What makes Jacob worthy in the eyes of the divine presence of the charge? His tenacity in the struggle, or the handicap that resulted from it? Because from then on, for the rest of his life, Jacob will limp. He's going to confront that brother who was a victim of his treachery 20 years before. And he imagines how the desire for vengeance has grown and festered in his mind. And here's Esau, marching at the head of an army of 400 soldiers. His red hair dominates their 400 shields shining in the sun. They march all morning and halfway into the afternoon. And it's in the middle of the afternoon, when fatigue drips like lead into the quicksilver of the mind, that the two brothers see each other on opposite sides of a large field. Esau signals to his men to stop, and he alone starts running across that field. His running expresses better than anything the character of that man. Physical, fiery, red. His feet barely touch the ground, but they propel him far forward, farther forward than muscles would normally do. And his eyes, don't forget his eyes. They don't waver from their target, Jacob's face. And here's Jacob on the other side of the field, who sets up a strange marching order. He places his concubines and their children in front, followed by Leah and her children, and in the back, in the safest position, he places Rachel and her two sons. And then he, Jacob, stands in front of everyone. And as Esau gets closer, Jacob begins to bow. His forehead will touch the ground 7 times. When he stands up for the 7th time, the 2 brothers are within arm's reach of each other. And here's what the text says. It's Genesis chapter 33, verse 4. And Esau threw himself on Jacob's neck, and he kissed him, and they wept. Hey, brother. It's been a long time. When I went back to Detroit, my brother would pick me up. The trip from the airport gave us a chance to chat before plunging into the family tohu bohu, our parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, cakes. Eat, you're so thin. Last time, in the car, my brother told me that he'd started working out in a local gym. Aerobics, weightlifting, swimming. I looked at him closer and I saw that not only had he lost weight, but that somehow he had gotten straighter, more energetic, more tonic. And I complimented him on it. Then he said he had met a really nice guy at the gym, that He and his wife and my brother and my sister-in-law would meet from time to time. He said they're really good people. They're Chaldeans. He said he was thinking of inviting them over while I was here. Would I like to come? I said, yeah, sure, great. I'd love to.